The discomfort doesn't mean you're hitting your ceiling. It means you're moving, which is really amazing if you think about it. I like it to the example of this, right? I've never played the guitar. I want to learn how to play the guitar, but I do know this. I have to move through a lot of discomfort and bad playing that guitar before I could ever be good. It's the same with goals, right? You're going to have to work through the discomfort, sometimes maybe being bad at certain things, right? Having some self doubt, all that. But no, that discomfort does, once again, it means you're moving.
Welcome to Planning Reimagined, a podcast from the planning experts at Robin Glenn and RX Investment Partners for wealthy families and successful business owners. At the start of a new year, many of us embrace the tradition of setting New Year's resolutions. But let's be honest, how many of those resolutions actually survive past January? Yet we keep going back to this familiar cycle year after year. So, as we ramp up for this new year, instead of jumping on the resolution bandwagon, why not take a fresh approach? Today, we're going to be exploring some powerful strategies to help you escape that resolution trap and help you completely transform how you define and pursue success. Joining me today is Dan Lappin, president and founder of Lappin 180. He's also an executive business coach, international speaker, and host of Breaking Sales podcast. And Dan is an expert in high performance mindset and sales coaching. And he has a lot of experience in helping individuals and organizations achieve breakthrough results. So I'm super excited about what Dan's going to share with us today to get our year started on the right step, right? So thank you so much for being here today, Dan.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So let's just go ahead and get started. Let's jump into it. So, many of us start the year focused on resolutions, the whole, old New Year's resolutions on specific goals. But your approach focuses on a mindset shift. So, first, can you start by explaining what mindset shift means and why it's crucial for personal growth and long-term success?
Absolutely. Mindset is something I wish I was taught back in high school, right? And all through college. Mindset, the best definition I've heard is it's how we gather, it's how we filter and decode the world around us, right? That's our mindset. And then our mindset drives our self talk. So if everybody can just kind of hang on for a second, right? There's this universal law out there of cause and effect. We've all been taught it, right? We've all heard of this universal law, cause and effect. There's actually a really important part that's missing, and that's called condition. So it's really called condition cause effect. How it works is this: for every thought that we have, we will either take an action or not take an action. For every thought that we have, right, we will either say something or not say something. And whatever that is leads to our results. So, like, for instance, if I'm tired, that's my condition, that's my thought, right? What am I going to do? Well, my action is I'm going to sleep. And when I sleep, the result is I'm rested. So our whole day is spent with condition, cause, effect, right? And if I speed it up a little bit, right, and I simply say, okay, if we have some doubt or we're scared or we're anxious, that's our condition, that's our thought. We got to follow through, right? Condition, cause, effect. So what's going to happen? Oh, what the actions are? We're going to feel bad, right? We're going to revert to what we know. We're going to revert to what's easy. What we know and what's easy has already created the current results that we have. So, right, if we want to create new results, whatever they might be, right, professional or personal or whatever, but if we want to create new results, we're going to take new actions. We have to take new actions. In order to take new actions, though, we have to think about what's our mindset. So that's why mindset is so important because it drives everything we do, don't say, hear or don't hear, which all of that drives any kind of result that we create. And once again, if we want to create something different, we have to do things that are different. And if we want to do things that are different, we have to shift the mindset.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, when you think about, yeah, you think about something and you do it or you don't do it. And going back to New Year's resolutions, it's something that we were taught a long time ago, or a goal setting in a very specific way. And because it's comfortable every year, we revert back to it, even if it hasn't worked for us in the past. But you're absolutely right. And you talk about how mind shifting our mindset creates new pathways for success. And so I think you've already kind of started to allude a little bit to how that works, but can you explain how that happens and what the impact is long term of those new pathways that are created when we shift our mindset?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. I also want to be clear, I am not a neuroscientist.
Well, I
I
am
have a
actually,
lot.
just so you know. I have a degree in neuroscience, but it's been a long time. So yeah.
Um, I wish I had taken classes in that subject matter, but it really wasn't a very popular subject matter when I went to school. But I'm surrounded by a lot of very smart neuroscientists and uh, cognitive and behavioral scientists and all that too. So the statistics out there and the research suggests, right, that 90 to 94% of our thinking is routine, right? And when you think about that, you want to shake your head, right? You want to go, no, that's not true. That's not true. But right when you think about how the brain works, we work in patterns. Survival is the number one mode that we are in. And so, right, even our ancestors, right, 40,000 years ago, one tribe, right, family would have food, another tribe or family would have maybe shelter and follow them and no food. Back then, they would approach each other, food, shelter, fire. But they had to figure out real quick, right, what was going to be this exchange. Was it going to be a safe exchange or a deadly exchange? And so we do have this thing called a primal mindset that is always working to protect us, right? Just like if our ancestors woke up in the morning and went outside and they saw fresh paw prints in the mud, that was serious. They had to learn to recognize that pattern. And then they had to obviously be able to filter and decode that pattern so that it would keep themselves and their family and their tribe safe. So again, 90 to 94% of our thinking is very much routine, and 80 to 85% of that is negative themes.
Wow.
Now, those negative themes are a lot about self preservation, right? Protecting ourselves, right? Creating doubt, right? All of that. Back then, 40,000 years ago, it served a purpose. And I've heard many a smart evolutionary psychologists say this that we have primal mindsets, but we all live in a modern world now. We don't walk outside our door worried about a saber-toothed tiger, right? We don't walk outside of our door worried about a flood because of the news and everything is going to tell us, right, how to protect ourselves. But our mindset hasn't quite caught up with the modern world that we're in. And so when people set goals, there's a little bit of that negative connotation right out of the gate, right? Because we've all been there and we focus on the outcome, we focus on the result. We put all this effort in, right? We work hard through the discomfort, the anxiety, the agitation, the frustration, and we don't see a lot for our efforts. And so, what do we end up doing 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks later, right? We end up starting to tell ourselves a story that lets ourselves off the hook.
That makes
So,
sense.
Yeah, mindset is just so important. And then how you reframe your approach to goals and what they are. Do you focus on the outcome, or can you help yourself start to focus on the process and let the outcome go?
So let's expand a little bit more on that because when you and I spoke before the podcast, that was something that I thought was so interesting the way that you shared it. We all, when we set these goals, we've been taught to set a goal. Here's the production number. Here's the amount of weight I want to lose, whatever it is that that goal is, right? So we're focusing on the end goal. And when it's too hard, to your point, or when we're trying to do things and we're not getting there, we tend to quit. That's just human nature. We go back to our comfort zone. So if focusing on the outcome isn't going to be the key to success, what do we need to do? How can we rewire our brains to let go of this ingrained way of thinking? And what do we need to do differently instead of focusing on the outcome?
Really good question. So it starts with our self-talk. So, right, it's a mindset practice. And we have to start looking at mindset truly as something that we can strengthen and create those new pathways. So, I've done the research on it and there's different papers and there's so forth and all that, but you know, 90% is routine, but that other 10% they say is very malleable. And I think that's the one we want to capitalize on. But we also have to remember we are human. We are going to revert. We are going to revert. So it's almost like every time we have an opportunity to make a decision towards something we want to create, it's just trying to strengthen a little bit of that self awareness so that we make the decision to keep moving toward what we want to create versus staying where we are with what we've already created. Right. Because the old adage goes, and I say this to all the people that we coach in the workshops that we have. Right, if you want to be here, you're going to have to do a lot of things more of or different because what you're currently doing is not going to get you there. If it was, you'd already be there. So the mindset that we try to help people with is to remind themselves that they're in the process. And I know it sounds simple, but think about it this way. If someone says they want to make $500,000 a year, okay, and they've never done that before, and whatever the number is, and you say, I'm going to make $500,000 this coming year. 90% of our brain, routine thinking, 85% or so negative. What do we hear on the little on our shoulder? We hear, are you sure? Sounds good, but you've never done it. How do you know? Are you really ready for the journey? Right? Like what happens? And so what we're doing is we're actually just playing into the 90% routine, 85% negative themes. We don't even know we're doing it. It's that subconscious or even conscious, and it's so subtle. However, if we change the tone, how we talk to ourselves and how we talk to ourselves in the process. So, like for your listeners right now, if they said, all right, I'm in the process of learning what I need to learn this year to make $500,000, feels different. I'm in the process, right, of making the mistakes that I need to make, of trying the new things I need to try to make $500,000. So right there and then, that subtle switch, instead of feeling like we're already lying to ourselves, we actually can start feeling some strength and confidence because we're being honest with ourselves. We are truly saying, hey, I'm in this process and I'm going to learn what I need to learn. I'm going to make the mistakes I truly do need to make. I'm going to meet the people that I need to meet. And I'm going to create the new behaviors that I'm going to need or routines to make $500,000.
Absolutely. I remember telling you when we spoke, when you shared it like that, even in my own brain, it helped me kind of feel calmer of thinking, okay, whatever that goal is, I'm in the process of it. And when we think about it realistically, whatever goal we want to achieve, it's not, typically a flip of a switch. There's a lot of steps or a lot of things we have to do day in and day out to get there. And when you think of it more in, I would say maybe bite-sized amounts, that you're in the process of meeting the people or doing the things, reading the books, whatever it is that you need to do, going to the gym 10 minutes if you've never gone, right? So whatever it is you need to do, I feel like that makes it so much more mentally achievable. And I can see how that changes how your brain perceives it. And our brain is a very powerful thing. Absolutely. So
You know,
go
like
ahead.
even like James Celeste, you made a good point. You're like, I want to be careful. I'm not going to get into this quote game, but James Clear wrote a really nice book called The Atomic Habits, right?
Hmm.
I'm sure many of your audience has read it, right? But I like the way his concept of his thinking works, which is, hey, today's a chance I get to make a vote. I'm either going to vote toward what I want to create in my life, or I'm going to make a vote toward what I already have. And I love that concept where it's like, I try to get up in the morning and I get up at 5 o'clock, and there are times I pop up and I'm at the gym and I'm all ready to go, but there are times 5 o'clock comes and there's no question. I'm sitting there going, oh, are you kidding? I got it up. Right. And then you hear the debate. I heard the debate in my head. Hey, just this one morning, just sleep in, get some rest. And then the other debate is, well, wait a minute, right? You're going to place a vote. Right in this moment, you're going to either vote. You're going to vote for where you're going. You're going to vote for where you already are.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a
Again,
great
what
way
is
to
that?
put it.
That's that self-talk. That's that mindset practice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so we've talked a little bit, about mindset, and it's such an important thing that you're right. I wish somebody would have talked to us about that positive self-talk. That's an important, especially as a teenager, high school class or middle schooler, right? If they would start them to have these positive thoughts instead of all the negative talk we have in our brain. But we also tend to label experiences. You and I talked about how, or you shared how we label experiences and how that impacts our growth. One of the things you mentioned was labeling experiences as good or bad. And can you explain how this concept works and how it applies just to our daily lives, especially when we're in a high pressure type of situation?
Absolutely. I'll start with a little bit of connectivity on what bad means to us. Okay. Because you're right. There is a way for all of us to strengthen this idea of going into a situation or going into a conversation, whether it's personal or business, and reminding ourselves, hold on, I'm not going to label anything good that I hear as good because I know if I do, I'm going to get sloppy. It's going to affect my listening. It'll affect my questions. It'll affect my actions. I'll probably get a little sloppy, which tends to be the case for all of us when we label something as good. But then when we label something's bad, right? It can be even worse because when we label something as bad, we tend to all of a sudden maybe move away from it, stay away from it, not dive into it, not find out more about it, not let our curiosity come out, right? Then we start to feel anxious, right? Hesitant, annoyed. Think about it as a parent. Think about it in business, right? You label something bad in an environment, situation, or conversation that you are in, you are immediately feeling the annoyance, the agitation, the frustration, the disappointment, the anxiety, the hesitation, or some form of it. Here's what's happening. So when we label something as bad, we actually do have a physiological response. It does affect our cognitive function. Let me give a simple example. So, right, we've all been there. You get an email from a peer or from a teammate, and that email is a little bit testy. That email's coming at you a bit, and you're like, hey, whoa, whoa, slow your roll, right? And you're like, why would they send that email? Then they've copied some people, which this intensifies the feeling of you're kind of being judged, you're being attacked. It's time to defend yourself. Right? We've all had those emails. Let's pretend instead of waiting the 24 hours, right? They all say the 24-hour rule. Let's pretend you fire back. You fire your response. You leave the office. It's 4 hours later. You check your phone. There's the person's response. Their name pops up in your email inbox. What's going through your head? Some people will literally have a physiological reaction of some chills, some goosebumps, right? A little sweat or something.
Some nausea,
They
maybe.
know, they know, here we go, because they've immediately labeled it as bad. That's what's happening. And then they open it, right? And we've all done this, right? Think about it this way, right? Celeste, how many times have
Mhm.
we all done this in the past, right? You open up that type of email, you know it's going to be some kind of response. It's 8 sentences long. How many of those sentences do you actually remember?
None.
You, you might remember one,
Yeah.
maybe, or two, right? Why? You labeled the interaction as bad. You are now having that physiological reaction, right? It has it has an impact on cognitive function, our memory, our ability to listen, our ability to be objective, our ability to ask questions. It affects all of it. So multiply that out, right? You're in a really important conversation with one of your children. You label something as bad. You're not that good as a parent anymore, right? You're talking to one of your teammates. You're the boss, right? You're the leader, and you label something as bad. You're not that effective anymore in that conversation. Or like in sales, right? You go out and you worked really hard to get the appointment, and that decision maker looks at you out of the gate and goes, "Hey, I just want to let you know we're really, really happy with our current provider."
Mhm.
You label that as bad because that's in the way of what you want, which is a particular outcome. It has an immediate effect on your curiosity, your strength, your questions, your calm, your confidence, all of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the positive, I mean, the opposite of that too, right? When you label something good and it gives you that euphoria of, oh, I just did so good. I'm such a great salesperson. And then you mess up the next conversation because you feel like you did so good before. So I can see how both the good and the bad labeling can affect just what the next steps that we take. But how can we move away like from those labels? Like what do we need to how can we go in almost in this neutral or approach things in a neutral way versus labeling them when we've always done that?
Yeah, it takes work. So it is a mindset practice. And that the reason why it is a practice, because it truly is. And I know there's people in your audience right now that they want to say, yeah, but I want to celebrate and I want to feel good. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But wait until whatever the process is over. Don't get caught ahead, right? Celebrating when you haven't officially got the document, the papers, or whatever it is signed, right? Athletes are taught this. So in hockey, and you may or may not have some hockey fans, but in hockey, there is statistics. It's funny. The worst lead in hockey, and they have statistically proven it, is the 2-goal lead. So if a team's got a 2-goal lead, it's actually the worst lead you could possibly have because you start thinking things are good. You start thinking you're doing really well. Next thing you know, it's 3-2. Next thing you know, it's 3-3, right? So we do have to be careful to try to just stay objective, right? What do a lot of people always say? Don't get too high, don't get too low, right? I know the Navy SEALs are taught a form of that, a very specific type of form, right? Pro athletes are taught that form. And we in business or we as parents or whatever it might be, we can adhere to that same strategy. Let's not get too high. Let's not get too low. Let's stay here in the middle and see this through subjectively as we can. And so what has to happen at that point is you have to learn to trust it. And it doesn't take long. Maybe maybe 3 examples where you sit back and you go, I'm not going to get excited here. I'm going to stay in the game. I still have questions I need to ask. I'm not going to get low here and I'm not going to feel bad here because I don't know if that's truly relevant yet. It's just information. Let me dive into it. That mentality is very powerful. It allows us to stay calm, confident, and curious with whatever we're experiencing.
And really, you're just so much more in control of kind of what that next step or what's going to happen next, really, because you're not trying to steer it in any which way. You're just doing what is the right next step or taking that. And when I think, when you're having a conversation with your spouse and you keep it neutral and maybe you're upset at them, but you don't immediately go in angry, how much better the outcome is than coming in mad, a situation like that. So it makes perfect sense. I can think of a lot of examples of daily life in which just staying that neutral, not good or bad, is very helpful. One of the things you mentioned when we were speaking is the concept of being low intent. Can you explain what that means? And also, how does that affect our ability to learn and grow?
Really good question.
Yeah.
So we are innately low intent, and I struggle with this for a long time, and I hated it. I was a very driven person. Sometimes it really helped me, and sometimes, like anything, because I didn't know how to manage it, it was to my detriment. As we all know, as we get older, we do get a little sharper and a little wiser and smarter. But when you're very driven in particular, or you're really committed or attached to a particular outcome, whether it's as a parent, as a spouse, as a friend, as a business partner, or whatever, right? When you're really attached to an outcome, we become low intent, which is how do I get them to see my point, right? How do I get my child to understand the decision making that they're making? And right? How do I get my spouse to see what I'm doing or understand my position on this, right? Or right in business, how do I get that prospect to like me? Right? How do I get them to want to do business with me? Or how do I get them to see my value? The number one attribute of trust is actually the polar opposite of low intent. Through trust, now trust can be built in many ways, but there's really six major attributes of it. Um, the first one's benevolence, which is high intent, which is seeking to understand the other person, or right, having that other person's back. Now, remember, having the other person's back doesn't mean you agree with them. It just means that you are looking out in their best interest.
Hmm.
But low intent is looking out on our own best interest. So, like an easy example is with sales, right? You hear the prospect or the client has a problem and you want a particular outcome, which is a second meeting, or you want to get some kind of commitment, or maybe even just land the sale, wherever you are in that process. But you've learned they've had a problem. And because you're attached to that outcome, you jump in to share your solution, your expertise. We have asked thousands of sales professionals across the country over many years this question: how often does that work? And they tell us less than 20% of the time.
Yep.
It's like, well, then why do you keep doing it? That's low intent, though. It's the natural urge. I need them to see my value. I got to get them to want to do business with me, versus the opposite, which is let me seek to understand where they are. What are they experiencing? What do they truly think and feel? Is this really worth their time? And by doing that, you're actually tapping into one of the major factors of how you build trust with another human being. So low intent is very dangerous, and it's so easy for us to slide into when we're very driven and when we already have a particular goal that we're attached to.
When you think driven, you don't think low intent. You think somebody that's, always doing, moving, working towards something. But the way that you just explained it, once again, that makes perfect sense. We just want the outcome to be ours, and we're not putting in the effort to really make it for, what is the right outcome of this, or are we looking for the best interest of the other group, whatever that situation is. So that makes perfect sense. But Detachment from an outcome is so counterintuitive. So we've been, once again, this has been ingrained in us since we were little. It's like you go and you play a sport and they're like, you want to win. That's the outcome. It's not make sure you're passing the ball or being a good teammate or, listening to the coach, which is really the steps that get you to the win. So detachment from it is so counteractive. What can we do as individuals in our daily lives to start moving in that direction and also to not lose motivation if that's the motivator of somebody is saying, I want to make $500,000, as you said. If that's their motivator and they're not focused necessarily on that, how can they move towards this mindset without losing that motivation?
Right. I mean, detachment doesn't mean we don't care. Okay. It doesn't mean we're irreverent, and it doesn't mean we become lazy, laissez-faire. Right. It is a mindset practice. I like to say it's a skill. It takes time to develop, but it's a skill that we all have the capability of. Remember, mindset is how we gather and we filter and decode the world around us. So we're still going to always do that, but it's our ability not to label something good or bad, right? It's our ability not to label something as a positive or a negative, because we all know once we do that, what happens shortly after. It affects how we listen, what we ask, what we don't ask, what we do, what we don't say, all of that. So detachment is just our ability in the moment not to get caught up in the outcome, follow our process. So if someone wants to make $500,000 a year, it's not that we're saying detach from the 500,000 in a way that says ignore it. What we're saying is, yes, it's there. Create a vision for it. What's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? But then let's work on what you're in the process of to get there, right? Because in order to make $500,000, if you've never done it before, like we talked earlier, and again, I'm just using the
Mhm.
financial example because it's
Right.
easiest,
Yep.
right? But if you've never made that 500,000, you already know you got to do some things that are more. You do. And you got to do some things that are different. And so what you do is you focus the process of that. Hey, I'm in the process of doing these couple things different, A, B, and C. And you focus on that, right? And you focus on more. I need to do a little bit more of, or a lot more of X and Y. I'm in the process of that on a daily or on a weekly basis. And that's where you put that mental process. Now, adding to that, I will share this, that it's pretty powerful if you can remember this. Look, discomfort is there for everybody. Some people just hide it better than others. But anytime you gotta do more or different, you're inviting the discomfort. It's
Mhm.
fun. So don't look at it as the enemy, because it's gotta be there. If you don't feel discomfort, what it means is you're not moving. So you should almost try to develop a mindset that not feeling any discomfort should be scary. So if you really have this goal, you want to try to embrace and welcome discomfort or agitation sometimes, some frustration, some doubt, or some annoyance. Because what that actually means is that you're moving through the discomfort that you need to move through. The discomfort doesn't mean you're hitting your ceiling. It means you're moving,
Mhm.
which is really amazing if you think about it. I like it to the example of this, right? I've never played the guitar. I want to learn how to play the guitar, but I do know this. I have to move through a lot of discomfort and bad playing that guitar before I could ever be good. I have to accept the fact that I'm going to be bad for a while before I could ever have the experience of being good. It's the same with goals, right? You're going to have to work through the discomfort, sometimes maybe being bad at certain things, right? Having some self doubt, all that. But no, that discomfort does, once again, it means you're moving.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this to you when we spoke, but growing up, my dad would always tell me, be comfortable being uncomfortable. And as a kid, I didn't really know what that meant. As I got older and I did have to do things that, to grow in a career or even as a parent or as a spouse, I realized, what exactly that meant. But at some point, even that discomfort, once work through that, it becomes comfortable. And now you're like, well, what's the next thing I need to work on then? If now I'm comfortable in this other situation or not. There's some folks that hate public speaking and will always hate it, but it's part of what they do. And so, they're working through that discomfort and they definitely do get better at it over time. Something that you said though I want to expand on now because you mentioned when we're growing, we make mistakes. And there's a word that people just don't like to think about, and that's failure, right? Nobody wants to talk about failing. I remember early on in my career, the thought of like failing at something made me just even thinking about it made me nauseous. But you teach that feedback and failure are essential for growth. So, how can we change our relationship with failure to foster personal development?
So, failure, there's like a scale, I think, on failure, right? That's been my experience. There's a spectrum, right, on it where there's certain failures for some that are much more manageable, right? But there's also failures for others that are almost, right, completely paralyzing and devastating, right? And so I do believe everybody has a certain spectrum of how they view failure, right? Again, mindset. How do you gather, filter, and decode the potential for failure in your life? And it's going to vary maybe depending on what part of your life you're going to experiencing it into. So there's a lot that goes into it. I know that. But again, if I look back and think about my experiences, right? Right, Celeste, think about it for you too, right? Think about what is some of the toughest feedback you ever got?
Yeah.
You remember it.
Hmm.
I remember my tough feedback, right? I remember first time getting in sales. I was so proud. I was setting all these appointments up, and the owner of the company, finally like decided to go on a meeting with me. We were sitting in front of some managing partner for a law firm, and right, this is decades ago. And I was prepped. I had our value proposition ready, had everything ready, right? And I went in there and I just vomited right on person regarding expertise and solutions. We left the meeting and the owner of the company, it was pouring rain, just looks at me and goes, "What the hell was that?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "That was the worst meeting I've ever been in. You didn't ask a single question." And he's like, "Don't ever do that to me again."
Wow. Yep.
Never forgot it. I remember when I first started my company, right? I had neighbors who were talking, right? And they would, some of them said to me, they would be like, "What are you doing? You have two young kids, right? You have this family. You took this risk. You need to get your butt back to corporate America. This is a very foolish endeavor that you're on. You need to be more, uh, the word was not respectful, but um,
Responsible for family.
responsible."
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And I just remember going, right? And I could go on. That list goes on. I just think that, right? Failure, man, that if we're willing to accept that feedback, it's often the best feedback we can ever get. Now, get it in the moment doesn't feel good, but that moment doesn't last very long because usually what we end up doing is we start taking actions to not repeat it again and to avoid it again. But I do, and there's so many really, really amazing high performers out there in so many fields. But one that comes to mind is Tom Brady, right? Because he talks about it. It's all over YouTube, it's
Hmm.
all over Instagram, right? But he just talks about in his life in particular, failure was everything. And that's how he learned to get better.
And
So I think it's, remember, and failure too, and you and I talked about this, and this takes a little time. Failure is not who we are. So, right, there's two things about who we are. There's our identity and there's our reputation. When we chase reputation, right, we're just chasing a brand, we're chasing a theme, we are chasing, right, something external to ourselves. Identity is who we truly are. And so when we fail, it's not that we're failing, all right? The situation, we didn't get it right. The experience, we didn't get it right. But it doesn't mean we as a human being are the failure. We might have failed in that situation, right? We might have failed in that experience. We might have failed in that particular scenario, but it doesn't mean or identify who we are. And we have a choice. Do we let that be the end game or do we give it another shot? But it's not who we are.
Yeah,
Does
it's
that
not
make
your
sense?
identity. Yeah, no, absolutely. When we discussed that, that was another, point that really stuck with what you shared, that failure is not your identity. It's a moment in time. I think what you said too is learning from that failure. You mentioned Tom Brady. There's so many successful folks, out there that are now have created incredible businesses, but it took maybe 7 or 8 before that to get to where they are today, right? And so we always see people and we're like, oh, they're so successful, overnight success, and that overnight success took 20, 30 years to get there. We just didn't see all the steps.
We're seeing we're seeing the 2%, right? When we see them successful, that's like 2, 3, maybe 5% of their journey.
Hmm.
We are not seeing the other 95% of the journey. And social media, it makes it even worse, right? Because on social media, you can pretend to be whatever you want to pretend,
Yep.
right? But your point is so spot on. I mean, 95, 98% of what really happens with nobody watching except for ourselves.
Yep. When you think back to all your failures too, at least for myself, or the times where things didn't work out as I expected, when I reflect back, it was such an incredible stepping stone. At the moment, I felt terrible. It wasn't a great feeling, but if we can learn from it, if we could move on from it, if we can, stop feeling sorry for ourselves and move on, then there's a lot of growth and learning that we can do, if we just don't give up and keep moving. So no, that's incredible. One of the things that you mentioned, was on feedback. And so, how can we accept, sometimes it's hard for us to hear that negative feedback, especially, I would say, I remember when I was younger, more, immature. I didn't think adults were smart. It was harder to kind of accept that. And sometimes, even as we get older, we're like, I'm so good at what I do. Why are you telling me this? How can we change once again our mindset about feedback and to help it be something that we grow from versus take it as a negative thing in our life?
Yeah. So feedback, again, is hard. I've been there and I'll be there again. My attitude toward it, probably just because of just experience and maturity over time, is that um, I hope I continue to get it. It doesn't feel good in the moment, but what I try to do, and I know what our coaches do, and I know what our some of those that we coach, right? It's all about don't label it. Try to debate it. Can you give yourself a chance to debate what's being shared? So someone says, "Hey, you're not good at this." Okay. Try not to label it good or bad. That's number one. Then see if you can allow yourself to empower yourself and just say, let me debate this. And you may not get there right away. The first 5, 10, 15 minutes, half hour, 2 hours that you get the feedback, right? You may not be able to get there right away. That's okay. But right, don't label it good or bad. Keep working on that. And finally give yourself the opportunity to say, let me debate this. Because that's the gift I can give to myself is let me try to debate what they said and see if there's something I can pull from it. That's what we all want to try to do. I
Yeah.
mean, I found that most of us, most people we've worked with are capable of it. Again, it doesn't have to happen the first day. It may take you a couple days to get there. It might even take you a week to get there. I don't know. But if you keep working at it, you'll get there and you'll learn the power of being able to debate it.
Well, and I think as we debate it, right, as I'm thinking it through personally, you start to realize, well, they were right about that. I could improve on this. Or, I'm not seeing, I had never seen it that way. It's a different perspective. And so, yeah, absolutely. It's like analyzing it, right? Going back and saying, I'm going to analyze what they shared in a more neutral, no good, no bad manner, right? So going
Yeah.
back.
It's like, yeah, it's like, okay, like, why did they say that? Right? It's a great question. What did they observe? What was their experience that made them say that? That's a great question to ask ourselves, right? And just try to see if we can dissect that a little bit. Is there merit possibly to what they said based on how they experienced that situation with me? If I put myself in their shoes, is there merit again to what they said, right? Is there a chance that others may have had that same experience, right? So it's just our ability just to take a step back and start to like analyze it and just kind of interview ourselves a little bit on it.
Be honest with ourselves, right? As well. So, well, this is
Sometimes
awesome.
that's easier than others.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
no question.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially during the holidays, pants start to get a little tighter. I'm like, no, but I didn't really eat that much, right? Not really
Right.
being honest with ourselves at that moment. So,
Well, the hardest part too is, and this is the hard part for all of us, and we all, I'll use the word suffer from it. I don't mean suffer in a bad way, but it's just one of those human traits that we have. The more effort that we put towards something, and the more time we commit towards something, whatever it is, we get attached.
mhm.
And when we get attached, we have this tendency to then create biases. And so when someone gives us feedback on it, it can really hit us hard because of all of what we've become attached to with the hard work and the time commitment. So that's why it's so important for us to remind ourselves it's not my identity, it's not who I am. Let me debate this. Let me slow down and see if there's any merit to what they've shared.
Yep. And even who we are evolves over time, right? So if we are willing to learn from each situation, as you mentioned, debate it, see what can I analyze from it, it's going to help us continue to grow and learn. And so with that in mind, we've talked about the mindset shift, we've talked about no good or bad, not focusing on the outcome, don't be low intent. All are great pieces of advice. And failure, it's not your identity. All of that are absolutely great points. So for our listeners, Dan, what are some actionable strategies that they can implement or start to implement? Because I think everything is a process, to your point, process. It's not going to just happen overnight, but what can they implement to cultivate this high performance mindset?
It is a process and they're going to have to cultivate it. Remember, evolution has already laid claim, right, on we all tend to be attached. We get attached to things, right? We have a tendency to have low intent, which is, right, how do I get that person or how do I get my share or how do I make sure I do this or protect my family on this and how do I make sure, right? There's a lot of that that goes on. And then there's this other thing called scarcity that we haven't talked about, which is very primal, right? Which is there's never enough. I mean, again, 40,000 years ago, right? Never enough food, never enough shelter, never enough protection. It really wasn't. So scarcity was a very high contributing mindset. All right. And scarcity nowadays, right, is hey, don't screw this up. You're going to go to a meeting. Hey, I'll say something stupid. Don't ask that question. You might upset them. If you upset them, they won't do business with you. Right. Scarcity is hey, don't look foolish, right? Or any of that. That's scarcity. And so those three mindsets are embedded in us. So what we have to do is we have to create processes so we can strengthen the other mindsets. Like for instance, instead of scarcity, there's abundance, right? For your audience, the next time they go in a meeting, whether it's a sales meeting, a client meeting, an internal meeting, right? Whether it's a feedback meeting or any kind of meeting like on performance, right? Remind yourself this one meeting doesn't define you. It doesn't. It's one
Mm-mm.
meeting. It's one conversation. It does not need to, and it should never define you. That's abundance. Abundance is knowing there is enough. And one of the greatest ways to be abundant, and I remember I had to do this when I started my business because you talk about failure and feedback. I went like 0 for 14 on my first attempts to attract a client in this space. And so the feedback I was getting was pretty severe. Nobody wanted to do business with me. So that was the failure and the feedback I got. But I couldn't let it permeate into more scarcity, right? Which is, hey, don't make a mistake. Don't screw this up. I had to go to abundance. In order to do that, I literally started doing a gratitude journal every morning. It still works to this day. Chris Shembra, he's a guy in New York. He's written a couple of books on gratitude. He's been on my podcast before. He's done a really nice job with it. But all the research is there as well, which is all about write down what's good. Stop focusing on what's bad. Stop focusing on what's not happening. I mean, you want to lose 10 pounds, stop focusing on the fact that you just gained two more. Now you want to lose 12 pounds, right? It's a process. Focus on what's good. And what I learned back then was, Celeste, was that every little thing happened. Hey, this person bought me a coffee. I wrote it down the next day. Hey, this person held the door open for me. I wrote it down. Hey, this person on the highway let me in. I really allowed my mind to search every morning for what was good so that when I wasn't making any money or when nobody wanted to work with me, when I had no revenue, when I had no plan B, I was still able to focus on the positives. And what I found is those positives build on each other over time, right? So, and another thing too, people can do is called spot the success. I didn't come up with it. Dr. Rachel Thoreau came up with it. She was on my podcast recently. She's, I think, in Seattle or Portland, right? And she wrote a great book about the self-talk workout. And what it is just taking the time to remind yourself of what did you contribute to that day, no matter how small, right? What effort, what action did you contribute in a positive fashion? It doesn't mean it was a giant outcome, but you contributed effort and action in some shape, form, or fashion towards something that day. It was your investment, your contribution, bought the success. And same ideology or thought process, write it down, no matter how small.
Yeah. When you have those
So
positive
there's,
thoughts, it just
go ahead.
change your perspective on, we have so much to be grateful for. I was just having this conversation with my daughter recently. 'Cause sometimes we take things for granted. Christmas comes around and there's a lot of presents, or, there's different points of the year in which we forget to be grateful and we realize, hey, there's so much to be thankful for. And you're right. My husband says this to me all the time. I'll mention something that happened and he's like, that's fantastic. Why didn't we go out and celebrate? And I'm like, I don't know, because it was just another day in the life, right? But if you focus on those successes, it just changes your mindset from, oh, I gotta do this. I have to work harder. I'm not doing this. I'm not getting there, into much more of a positive state of mind.
Yeah, you mentioned or you asked a question early in our discussion today about pathways. That's how you start creating a new pathway, and it's how you start strengthening it. So if someone's listening to us right now and they're like, yeah, but I know this about me. I do tend to have some self-doubt. I do tend to think a little bit more on the negative side than I want to or care to admit, right? I do those things. Well, the first thing they could do is just try to do a gratitude journal. Take the time to think about all the good things that did happen to you and take the time to document all the things that were good that you contributed to in some shape, form, or fashion. And every time you do that, you are actually building the new pathway.
Yeah, that's great advice. No, absolutely. Well, you mentioned your podcast. We definitely want to encourage the audience to, check out your podcast, Breaking Sales. I had the opportunity to listen to some of your episodes, and each one was different. I took something from each one of them. So I feel like there's a lot of valuable insight in just that. And I know there's other ways to connect with you. Maybe if you want to share a little bit about what you do within, what you and your coaches do within your firm with your clients.
Sure, I appreciate you mentioning all that.
Hmm.
Thanks, Celeste.
Hmm.
I mean, the easiest way to get a hold of me is through LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. very easy. We coach high performance in sales. We do executive coaching too. It's all about how to have positive, what we call disruptive conversations, right? How to create positive tension and meaningful tension in conversations, right? Because that's the best conversations we always have, right? It's always about helping other people think, how helping them become more objective about their thought process, right? Helping them become more open to feedback and our ability to give it in a benevolent, empathetic, and objective way. That's our lane. That's our strength.
Great. No, that's wonderful. And I'm sure there's a lot of, of our audience that can benefit. I think we can all benefit from that. Folks that maybe are in a particular spot in life where they really need that particular level of coaching. So thank you so much, Dan. This has really been great. I've learned a ton from our previous conversation and today as well. So definitely encourage our audience to seek your organization out, your website. We'll include your contact information in our show notes. But just thank you so much for your insights and wisdom. Really appreciate it. And I know it's going to be really helpful for our audience and hopefully helps them start to kind of redefine how they're looking at, success and growth for themselves.
Love it. Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it.
Thank you, Dan. So as we mentioned for our audience, those of you looking to dive deeper into high performance mindset strategies, we'll be including Dan's contact information in our show notes, along with some other helpful resources. And please join us in our next episode, in which we'll be exploring the world of the blue collar businesses. We'll be discussing what those business owners and their successors need to know to properly and effectively manage, grow, and most importantly, protect their wealth. So definitely an episode you don't want to miss. That's a wrap for today, but if you enjoyed what we shared, please like, subscribe, and share our podcast. And as always, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Planning Reimagined, where your wealth journey meets our expert insights. We'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and please be sure to follow on your favorite podcast player. To connect with us, you can email us at hello@robinglenn.com or schedule some time with us via the link in the show notes. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Hello Robin Glenn.